Thank you. Please be seated. Honorable Mahau, please mute your mic. Honorable members, before we proceed with today's work, I wish to announce that the vacancies which occurred in the National Assembly due to the resignation of Ms. P. Faku, Ms. G.T. Makwebu, and Mr. T.D. Kalipa have been filled by the nomination of Mr. M. Basopu, Mr. M.R.M. Mutapo, Ms. S.T. Maneli, with effect from the 24th of November 21 respectively. The members have made and subscribed to the oath in the Speaker's office. Welcome, honorable members. Lastly, in the interest of safety, as we always do, honorable members, they want to see you. Okay. Honorable members, as we usually alert you, we should do it every day. It's not only for us in the House, but it's for everybody back at home, outside there in the public, that we should keep to the protocols that will keep us safe from the spread of this pandemic. Let's comply. Let's be exemplary in every way possible. Thank you very much. The Secretary will read the first order of the day.
Consideration of report of ad hoc committee to initiate and introduce legislation amending section 25 of the Constitution.
Honorable Chief Whip, Mike Masuta, switch off your mic, Ndati. Please, man. Go ahead, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Honorable Deputy Speaker. Honorable Deputy Speaker, I hereby move that this report be adopted to the House. Thank you.
The motion is that the report be adopted. Are there any objections?
Yes, House Chair.
Yes.
The objection of the Democratic Alliance.
Honorable Mazoni? It's me here in the chair. Yes. Thank you very much. There is an objection?
Thank you, Honorable Deputy Speaker.
Yes, sir.
Please note the objection of the Freedom Front Plus.
I will.
Deputy Speaker.
Deputy Speaker.
Go ahead. Go ahead, honorable member.
Please note the objection of the IFP.
We will.
And the ACDP, thank you.
I will.
Deputy Speaker.
Yes, sir. I'm listening.
Note the objection of the economic freedom fighters as well.
I will. Honorable members, we are noting those objections and the motion is agreed to. The Secretary will read the second order.
Second reading debate, Constitution 18th Amendment Bill.
Honorable MS Mutseha.
Your Excellency President Cyril Ramaphosa, Deputy President David Mabuza, the Speaker of Parliament, the Deputy Speaker of Parliament, Ministers present and Deputy Ministers, Directors, leaders of political parties, and all distinguished members of this august House. Today, we have an ample opportunity to remind all South Africans, both black and white, that the principal object of establishing of the ad hoc committee to amend Section 25 of the Constitution was to eradicate the original sin in the best interest of all South Africans, not a section thereof. It is therefore important for South Africa and the world to be reminded of the nature of this original sin, to aid its understanding of this inhuman crime against the African humanity. The original sin. Indigenous African people were violently dispossessed of the land and its natural resources by the Dutch and British settlers. The Dutch settlers who occupied the Cape in 1652 enslaved the native population and used it as their source of cheap labor. The British settlers who occupied the Cape from the beginning of the 18th century introduced, abolished slavery and introduced liberal policies which denied the Dutch settlers slave labor and limited their access to African land and cheap labor. Thus, during the 1830s, the Dutch settlers migrated to Natal, the Free State, and the Transvaal in search of land and its natural resources, as well as cheap labor. The African majority waged wars of resistance against the Boers and in defense of their land and dignity. Thus, from the first half of the 19th century, the Dutch settlers violently dispossessed African people of their land and its natural resources in these three colonies. The discovery of gold, of diamonds in 1866 and gold in 1886 created a scramble for the soul of South Africa between the Dutch and the British settlers. The scramble led to the First Anglo-Boer War in 1880 and 81. African people supported the British settlers during this war, hoping that in the event of victory, they would regain their land and its natural resources. The British settlers and their African allies were defeated by the Dutch settlers under Paul Kruger and at Majuba Hill. The British and the Boers entered into an agreement which excluded the African majority. The African condition was worsened by the Berlin Act of 1885, which legalized the partition of Africa into colonies which were shared amongst the European powers. The resulting scramble for Africa and the discovery of the minerals deepened the conflict between the Boers and the British settlers, which led to the Second Anglo-Boer War of 1899 and 1902. The British persuaded Africans to support them during this war on the ground that in the event of victory, the British would restitute the land with the natural resources which were violently taken away from them. Thus, Africans participated in the Second Anglo-Boer War and changed the balance of power in favor of the British led by Lord Milner. At the end of the war, the British once again betrayed the African people and concluded the Treaty of Vereeniging, which legalized racism and forged closer unity and cooperation between the Dutch and the British settlers. The British colonial authorities disarmed the African people and allowed the Dutch settlers to return to the land which they had violently taken away from the native population. The British also carried over the native resources or locations which were labor camps created by the Dutch settlers during the 18th and 19th centuries. The question which faced the British colonialists after the Second Anglo-Boer War was characterized as the native question. This question confronted the British with a choice between the assimilation of Africans into the new order or to keep them imprisoned in the native reserves or locations and to create a separate native administration for them. To address the native question, which was two-legged, Lord Alfred Milner established the South African Native Commission and appointed Sir Lagden as its chairman. The commission was mandated to conduct an investigation into the territorial segregation of black and white populations and to establish a separate native administration for black and people and African people in particular. The betrayal of African people by the British people after both the First and Second World Wars catalyzed the birth of the Congress movement. This Congress movement, which was rooted in the Ethiopian movement, opposed this racial and territorial segregation and called for the creation of the Union of South Africa, which was inclusive of all the people. But Cecil John Rhodes, the founder of the British Secret Society and author of British Imperial Plan, declared in a speech in Parliament that the native is to be treated as a child and denied the franchise. We must adopt a system of despotism, such as workers in India, in our relations with the barbarism of South Africa. So Cecil John Rhodes made it clear from the outset that Africans do not belong to this country. Now, he also, under Lord Milner, began the process of uniting all the four colonies, which and convened a national convention, which met in Durban in 1908, where a draft constitution was adopted, South Africa Bill of 1909. But African people did not accept that draft constitution, and they convened their own meeting in Bloemfontein, where they decided that they would send a delegation to Britain to oppose this draft constitution. Now, during that time, there were two lawyers, South African lawyers in Britain. That was Alfred Mangena and Pixley Kaseme. President Sfako Makato of the Transvaal Native Conference instructed them to make submissions to the British government that African people do not accept the South Africa Act and that it should not be ratified. But the British, contrary to the will of the people of South Africa, ratified the South Africa Act. And that means that this act was not based on the will of the people of South Africa and was therefore illegitimate. And therefore, the Union of South Africa itself was illegitimate. But this illegitimate Union of South Africa adopted the Natives Land Act 27 of 1913. Now, interestingly, as the colonial authorities themselves accepted, that act was based on the report of Sir Lachden, which authorized the territorial and racial separation, and also adopted the creation of these native reserves and location. And at the time of the adoption of this act, black South Africans only had access to 7% of the total surface of South Africa. And the Constitution had said a commission will investigate a further allocation of land to African people. But when that was done by Judge Beaufort, they only increased that to 8% until 1936, when it was increased to 13%. So it means, therefore, that this original sin shaped the land occupation by African people, and also it shaped the administration of the affairs of African people. So we can see that there was a grave injustice done to the African majority in particular, and the black people in general. Now, the amendment bill that is before us seeks to address this inhuman crime or this crime against the African majority. Now, those who unfortunately have to vote with us on this matter are the beneficiaries of this crime against the African humanity. And they have the support of a coalition of some Africans who do not know the history of this country, and they are supporting this because they hope that through their unholy coalition in 2024, they will gain power and do what they like. But we want to assure them that the ANC is still in power, and the ANC has other instruments that it will use to ensure that the people of South Africa get access to the land. So we are not worried about those who are not supporting this bill, but we are quite confident that with or without them, the ANC is going to make the land available to the people, because without making the land available to the people, we have a situation where the triple challenge of poverty, unemployment, and inequality will continue. Without making land available to the people, we have a situation where the deepening moral degeneration and social ills will continue. Now, those who don't want to support this bill are saying that the suffering of the African people in particular and black people in general should continue until some time in the future when they will be in power, something that will never happen in our lifetime. And they think that the power that they acquired through unholy coalitions will last. These unholy coalitions are going to collapse before long, and the people of South Africa will come back to the only organization that will liberate them from poverty, unemployment, and inequalities. The people of South Africa will come back to the African National Congress, which will ensure that we arrest the deepening moral degeneration and the social ills. Our people are suffering from femicide, gender-based violence, teenage pregnancies, and so on. And it is not because our people have no values. It is simply because the effects of the original sin is still with us. We have to eradicate this original sin, which is a crime against humanity, which is a crime against our people. So those who don't want to vote with us on this matter are simply saying our people deserve to suffer until some time in the future when they dream that they will in power. And that is not going to happen. There's no South Africa that can be run by unholy coalitions and make sure that we have sustainable development. So we want to call on all South Africans to listen carefully to the speakers that will come here. Some of them even said during local government elections that they will return land to the people and create jobs. And if you don't vote for this bill, how are you going to return land to the people? It's only through this bill that land can be returned to the people. So all South Africans who respect the will of the people of South Africa will vote with us today so that this bill goes through. And some political parties forget the fact that our constitutional democracy is both representative and participatory. And participatory democracy places the will of the people above the will, selfish interests of political parties. So today we want the people of South Africa to see those people who are voting against their will, because during the public hearings, South African people have spoken. They said, we want you to amend this constitution so that we can have our land back. Now, those who vote against this bill are voting against the will of the people of South Africa, and therefore they cannot continue to claim to be Democrats. All Democrats will vote in favor of the will of the people, not in favor of their selfish interests. So your days as Democrats are numbered. Today you have come here, if you have come here today to bury yourselves, because you cannot vote against this bill and still go out and call yourself a Democrat. You can't. And there are some peacetime heroes and heroines. And today they say they can't support this bill. And if they can't support this bill, what revolution are they pursuing? Because a revolution is about changing the lives of the people for the better. And there's no piece of legislation before us that can achieve that. It is only the amendment bill that we have tabled today that can change the lives of our people for the better. So your days are numbered as the Democrats, your days are numbered as peacetime revolutionaries, because the ANC is determined to return the land to the people, and the ANC has various instruments that it will use to make sure that the land goes back to the people. So if there's anybody who thinks that by withholding their votes, they are going to frustrate the ANC and frustrate the people of South Africa, you are wasting your time. We are forging ahead. We're going to make the land and its natural resources available. We're going to make sure that we combat the triple challenge of poverty, unemployment, and inequality. We're going to make sure that we arrest the deepening moral degeneration and social ills, and our women and children will be safe and will have an opportunity to develop in a safe environment, with or without the votes of the unholy alliance that we have seen emerging, which is cheating itself and suggesting that they will get power by default. So good luck as you go down into a grave that you dug for yourself. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Honourable Lotrit.
Honourable Deputy Speaker, it is very ironic that this year, where we are celebrating the 25th anniversary of the adoption of our Constitution, that we are debating an amendment to this Constitution that will have dire consequences for this country. Chapter 2 of the Constitution states, this Bill of Rights, and maybe it is important for the ANC to listen, this Bill of Rights is a cornerstone of democracy in South Africa. It enshrines the rights of all people in our country and affirms the democratic values of human dignity, equality, and freedom. It further states that the state must respect, protect, promote, and fulfill the rights in the Bill of Rights. Although Section 25 forms part of the Bill of Rights, the founding provisions, as stated in Chapter 1 of the Constitution, cannot be ignored, specifically the rule of law. It is within this framework that this bill must be assessed. And there are two questions. First, we have to answer, is it necessary to amend Section 25? And secondly, does it comply with the values and rights enshrined in the Constitution? Agbare adjunkspreker, om te bepaal of 'n wysiging van artikel 25 nodig is, moet daar gekyk word na die motivering van die wysiging. Yes, the motivation for this amendment. Die motivering wat voorgehou is vir die wysiging is dat dit wat implisiet is, eksplisiet gemaak moet word, nie soos wat nou van tevore gesê is deur die agbare Motshega nie. Die werklikheid is dat hierdie motivering bloot 'n rookskerm is om regverdiging te verskaf aan 'n proses wat selfs nie eers deur almal in die ANC ondersteun word nie. Die grondwet is nie 'n stel regulasies nie. Dit bied riglyne en norme waaraan handelinge en wette moet voldoen en gemeet kan word. Die wyse hoe dit in praktyk gedoen moet word hanteer deur die algemeen geldende regsvoorskrifte. Dit is waar die implisiete eksplisiet gemaak word, nie deur die grondwet te wysig nie. Wetgewing is die meganisme waardeur grondhervorming moet plaasvind en dit moet plaasvind.
Honorable Speaker, order.
Regering met die nodige politieke wil en kapasiteit om dit te doen.
Honorable member, just a moment. Honorable
Tseki. Honorable Speaker, on the gadgets, there's no translation.
Okay. All right, let's call on them to please sort that out. Translations, please do that. Honorable members, please do things orderly. You can't be throwing rulings from the floor. Just allow the one in the chair to do that. Yeah. And be orderly, please. Honorable members, keep your voices lower. The public and everybody else would like to listen to the debate. So I really appreciate that all of us, all through the House, let's do that. I know please switch off if you are not given the space to speak. Honorable members, check your gadgets, please. Thank you very much. Go ahead, honorable member.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Grondhervorming moet plaasvind onder leiding van 'n regering met die nodige politieke wil en kapasiteit om dit te doen. Die grondwet en spesifiek artikel 25 is nie die struikelblok in die grondhervormingsproses nie. For example, in Section 25(4), the Constitution places a specific responsibility on the state to give effect to the nation's commitment to land reform. Section 25(5) is very clear that the state must take reasonable legislative and other measures within its available resources to foster conditions which enable citizens to gain access to land on an equitable basis. It cannot be more clear. The proposed amendment changes this specific obligation of the state and substitutes it with a vague reference to certain land to be placed under the state's custodianship. In other words, custodianship is included for the mere sake of winning the support of radical populists. The addition of custodianship also goes beyond the mandate given to the ad hoc committee by the National Assembly and can therefore not be included in this bill. To address the question of whether this bill complies with the founding provisions and values of the Constitution, we have to look at what the status of property rights is in our Constitution. A primary element of the rule of law and human rights, two of the founding provisions, is that it should include respect for property rights. This is in line with international law and specifically Article 17 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, to which South Africa is a party. This bill creates uncertainty regarding property rights and will have an adverse effect on investment and land improvements. The proposed amendment that states that land and any improvements on it may be expropriated with nil compensation is precisely the type of situation that will cause this uncertainty. This is not what the country needs now in the time of economic devastation during the COVID pandemic. It is therefore beyond belief that there was no socio-economic impact assessment done of this bill, and the bill itself states that there will be no financial implications. This is, to say the least, madness. We cannot allow any amendment of the Constitution that will place property rights and economic prosperity at risk.
Honorable Lottery, just a moment. Who's speaking?
Mlenzana.
Yebo.
It's just a question if the member is ready to take my question.
Honorable Lottery?
No, Chairperson, we can talk afterwards.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Honorable Member.
Creating uncertainty regarding property rights goes counter to the rule of law. Our further concern is that the bill states that national legislation must set out specific circumstances where a court may determine that the amount of compensation is null. National legislation is a much lower threshold for approval, and it opens the door for arbitrary circumstances to be determined for when the compensation must be null. The Constitution as it stands provides for specific circumstances, and any legislation should be measured against that. So to answer those questions that I put at the start, there is no need to amend Section 25, and this bill falls foul of the constitutional test. Die grondwet is juist daar om die balans tussen regte te handhaaf en om die burgers van 'n land teen die vergrype van die staat te beskerm. Hierdie wetsontwerp versteur daardie balans en beskerm nie die inwoners van hierdie land nie. Dit maak ook die deur oop vir enige toekomstige wysigings aan die handves van regte. As dit nou met so gebrekkige proses aanvaar en deurgevoer word, skep dit die presedent vir enige verder wegkalwing van die menseregte van die burgers van Suid-Afrika. Die DA ondersteun nie hierdie wysigingswetsontwerp nie. Dankie.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Honorable Malema.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. When the EFF introduced the motion for the amendment of the Constitution to allow for land expropriation without compensation in 2018, we had an absolute clarity of mind on what needed to be done to correct the anomalies in land holding created by the colonial land dispossession and apartheid forced removals. Our original motion in 2018 called for the establishment of an ad hoc committee to do the following: review and amend Section 25 of the Constitution to make it possible for the state to expropriate land in the public interest without compensation, and in the process conduct public hearings to get the views of ordinary South Africans, policymakers, civil society organizations, and academics about the necessity of and mechanism for expropriating land without compensation. Propose the necessary constitutional amendment with regard to the kind of future land tenure regime needed, taking into account the necessity of the state being a custodian of all South African land. It is now common cause that the ruling party proposed an amendment to the motion, which took us along winded road and asked the Constitutional Review Committee to investigate the necessity of and mechanism for the expropriation land without compensation. This ought to not have been the guiding question, because in our original motion we had laid out in great detail the need for the amendment of Section 25 of the Constitution. When the Constitutional Review Committee completed its work, after talking to thousands of our people across all corners of this country, it recommended to this House that the Section 25 of the Constitution must be amended to make explicit that which is implicit in the Constitution with regard to the expropriation of land without compensation as a legitimate option for land reform, so as to address the historic wrongs caused by arbitrary dispossession of land, and in so doing ensure equitable access to land and further empower the majority of South Africans to be productive participants in ownership, food security, and agricultural reform programs. Hidden from the recommendation of the Constitutional Review Committee was the frustrations millions of African people in this country felt at the slow pace of land reform. The report could not find ways to correctly communicate the frustration of farm workers who are still victims of legal and illegal eviction by farm owners and their desperation for land they can call their own. The report could not correctly put into words the desperation of the elderly across the country who have been waiting for years to have their land restored and their failure and the failure of the democratic state to ensure that there is a thoroughgoing resolution on the land question. Despite this, we allowed the process to go through because we thought that as Black people who are collectively victims of colonial land dispossession and apartheid land removals, we will be able to find each other when amending the Constitution. We are here to report to the people who have entrusted us with the responsibility of amending the Constitution to ensure a swift return of their stolen land that the dominant Black political parties could not find each other on this question. The EFF made cogent submission on the amendments needed to have far-reaching effects on the repossession of land by the African majority. All these submissions were outrightly rejected by the ruling party, which has preoccupied itself with maintaining the status quo and protecting the interest of white landowners. We submitted the Section 25, subsection 2 of the Constitution must be amended to explicitly state that land may be expropriated without compensation. We also submitted that Section 25, subsection 3, which provides for compensation for expropriation, should be removed completely and be replaced with a positive provision allowing for state custodianship of the land. We also initially submitted that the section that provides for land restitution must be removed in order for the country for focus on redistribution-led land repossession program, not one with limited scope as land restitution is currently. All these submissions were rejected by the ruling party. The bill that this House is asked to approve today will take African people's struggles for land repossessions many steps back. The bill, which was rammed through the committee by the captured legal services of Parliament, placated even the compromise position of the Constitutional Review Committee. According to this bill, compensation for expropriation will remain a default position, but provides for obscure circumstances in which amount of compensation may be nil. The concept of nil compensation was never there when Parliament resolved to adopt the EFF motion in 2018 and when it adopted the report of the Constitutional Review Committee. The nil compensation vocabulary was introduced by the Legal Office of Parliament in collaboration with and at the insistence of lobby groups that captured this process for their own selfish interests. We reject the assertion of nil compensation simply because it is vague and will in essence provide for extra limited instances in which compensation could be at below the market value of the land. We now know that the process of expropriation bill, which ran parallel to the constitutional amendment process, has defined conditions under which land can be expropriated at nil compensation. These conditions include abandoned land, land that poses health and environmental risk, state land, etc. These do not constitute the type of land needed to comprehensively deal with the land question in this country. We have also made substantial submission for state custodianship of land as the only land tenure arrangement that will allow for a broad-based redistribution of land and for ensuring strong security of tenure for the majority of the people. The current bill makes meaningless provision for the state to be a custodian of certain land and does not define what this certain land is. If this bill is allowed to pass, it will significantly sell out position and it will undermine the struggles of Black people. The practical implications of this bill will be far worse than the current property clause of the Constitution. We have tried to reason with the ANC on several occasions, and it has become very clear to us that the ruling party does not represent the interest of the dispossessed masses of our people. They are hell-bent on protecting the interest of the settler minority, an oppressive and exploitative system of land holding as represented by the current freeholder arrangement to title. We reject this bill and call on millions of our people to do whatever it takes to get their land back. We tried, but the parliamentary process was hijacked by the ANC and their handlers, and unless we have overwhelming majority in parliament, black people stay landless in this country. Our people must take it upon themselves to ensure that they return what was stolen from them. This process is a failure. The ANC is completely captured by white monopoly capital, and it will not do anything in its power to return the land to the rightful owners. It is led by cowards who don't want to offend their handlers, because majority of those who lead the ANC today were themselves spies, and they were captured when they were young, and they can't offend those who handled them when they were young because their files will be released. We are dealing with a complete bunch of sellouts who are scared to deal with the land issue decisively. We call on South Africans to know that it is now in their hands. They must stop trusting that the ANC can do anything in its power to give them the land back. They must take it upon themselves to reclaim that which was stolen from them, and the EFF will be fully behind them when they engage in that struggle of taking back the land that was stolen from them by children of criminals. The Deputy Speaker, the EFF rejects this bill because it's a complete departure from the radical proposal that we've made. Ours remain and will never change. Expropriation of land without compensation, not even with nil compensation. We don't want compensation at all, and we want the state to be the custodian of the land.
Order, honorable members. Let's give Honorable E.M. Buthelezi a chance to speak. Go ahead. Honorable member at the back there, can you stop shouting? This is repeated. You are not heckling. Now you are making a full-time job to speak with everybody else in the house. No. Can you stop, please, man? Honorable Mashik, have some order on that. Please, man, yeah. And you are doing it badly when you have a mask on. It's impolite for that reason, too. Please, go ahead, Honorable C.
Thank you very much, Honorable Deputy Speaker. Let me say at the beginning, I haven't been to Home Affairs to change my surname from Buthelezi to Singh, but Honorable Buthelezi, who served on this committee, is having some network problems. The position of the IFP on this bill is as follows. We are told that the bill amending Section 25 of the Constitution, the property clause, is the product of the will of the people. What we have been told is simply smoke and mirrors. It cannot be further from the truth. This bill, if adopted, will not change land ownership patterns. The process has been used as a political tool to manipulate the ordinary South Africans who are not legal experts into believing that the Constitution, not the government, is at fault for the complete failure to advance land reform. The reason for slow progress is simple. The government is corrupt. Government have abused land reform projects to benefit the elite and cadres of the governing party for decades. Less than 2 weeks ago, an Eastern Cape official in the Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development was found guilty on charges of fraud of more than 2.6 million rand relating to a land distribution grant. While some government officials are stuffing their pockets, hard-working African farmers are waiting desperately for government assistance. The IFP has always remained resolute that land reform and restitution must take place urgently. There is a desperate hunger for land claims to be settled and for financial and business assistance to be given to emerging farmers. Sadly, there is no will. It has all been a political game at the cost of the people of South Africa. The fact that the committee kept on asking for extensions to finalize this bill is evidence of this political game. The IFP strongly believes that last-minute amendments made to the bill to introduce, and I quote, state custodianship of certain land, close quote, in section 25(5) did not fall within the mandate of the committee and was just a political move. The committee was mandated to, and I quote, make explicit that which is implicit in the Constitution with regards to expropriation of land without compensation, close quote. How is the introduction of state custodianship of certain land making explicit that which implicit regarding expropriation? Why should the people have any trust in government to act as a custodian of certain land? How on earth will this land be returned to the dispossessed? The committee not only ignored its mandate, but it also went against the advice of Parliament's legal services. The team cautioned that the committee should seek the House's approval for amending further provisions to the 2019 draft bill. It did not do so. We are told that the bill represents the views of the people. However, committee members only saw a report of about 150,000 public submissions received in July 2021. Is that the will of the majority of the people? The process follows raises many, many questions. The IFP believes that Section 25, as it is currently framed, is certainly broad enough to justify that it may be just and equitable in a specific case for nominal compensation to be paid on expropriation. Our Constitution has never endorsed a market value approach. It may even be just and equitable in a specific case that nil compensation or zero rand is justified. However, this should be in very limited circumstances, and we believe the court should always act as the arbiter in this determination. There is absolutely no need to amend the Constitution to test these constitutional powers. What we desperately need is the will of the government, the will to act, the will to use the Constitution to advance land reform. This bill is not the solution. An efficient, dedicated, and corruption-free government is the only solution. And let me say, Honourable Deputy Speaker, from 1998, when land claims were open, there are still thousands of claims that have still not yet been processed, just to find out whether there's prima facie evidence of those claims. And that is the biggest problem that we are having here. The administration is just not up to the task of ensuring that legitimate claims are brought before the Land Claims Court or the Land Claims Compensation Commissioner to deal with them. Hopefully, Honourable Minister, when you speak later, you might say that the bill you've introduced about the new Land Claims Court could assist. The IFP rejects the bill. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
Honourable Mulder. Go ahead, Ndati. Honourable Chief Whip on Seni Suoni. Create order manner of that to say. Go ahead.
Honourable Deputy Speaker, I would like to start off by reacting on the speech of the Honourable Motshekga. The one point that the Honourable Motshekga throughout made was that the ANC truly represents the will of the people. He felt very strongly about that. My question would then be, what happened on the 1st of November? Because on the 1st of November, it was clear you did not truly represent the will of the people. You got below 50%. The second point I would like to make, Honourable Motshekga, of course, with regard to history, and you gave us a lesson, you're entitled to your opinion, but not your own facts when it comes to history. And lastly, with all due respect, you didn't refer one single word about the bill itself. Honourable Deputy Speaker, if you want to change the Constitution or an entrenched section of the Constitution or the Bill of Rights, you cannot make a single procedural error, not one. In this process, many errors were made. It started with the Constitutional Review Committee, 3 different ad hoc committees followed. Most procedural mistakes were made during the Constitutional Review Committee process and the other 2 ad hoc committees. Then we had the public participation process. We had public hearings in the provinces, 33 were held originally. Let's say 1,000 people attended, approximately 33,000 people expressed their opposition to not amending, they wanted to amend. But 630,000 plus written submissions were received. Of those, 75% were against amendment. We had oral submissions in Parliament. 53 submissions were heard. 41, 77% were against. Those were policymakers, civil society, organizations, and academics. What are the consequences of land expropriation without compensation? Amending Section 25 of the Constitution to provide for the expropriation of land or property without compensation will make all property rights null and void. The erosion of property rights in South Africa will create uncertainty and will inevitably divert potential investment away from the country and will ultimately result in economic failure and collapse of South Africa. Section 17 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as contained in the International Bill of Human Rights, clearly states, 1, everyone has the right to own property alone as well as in association with others. 2, no one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his property. The implementation of land expropriation without compensation is a contravention of the International Bill of Rights. It is also in conflict with about a dozen treaties that South Africa has signed in the past. What does the bill actually say? First section, where land and any improvements thereon are expropriated for the purposes of land reform, the amount of compensation payable may be nil. This is completely unacceptable. Whenever provision is made for nil compensation, we are dealing with confiscation. Nil compensation as a term is being used by the ANC because they are too embarrassed and too shy to tell the international community that the democratic government of South Africa is prepared to take people's property without any compensation. Nil compensation means exactly the same as no compensation. The second provision says the following, that national legislation must provide circumstances where the amount of compensation is nil. The right to own property is a fundamental right entrenched in the basic international principles of the rule of law. That is why the rule of law is entrenched in the South African Constitution in the founding provisions in Section 1C. It can only be amended with a 75% majority. That's so, don't be under the impression you need 2/3. You need 75% today and you won't even get 2/3. It's absolutely disingenuous to try and undermine these principles by way of ordinary legislation where only a 50% majority of the National Assembly will be sufficient. This will be unconstitutional and in direct conflict with the current provisions of Section 25(2)(b) and 25(3) of the South African Constitution. The ANC has gone through this process. It took almost 3 years. 3 years that we've been creating political uncertainty in terms of what's going to happen with property rights in South Africa. And the ANC has gone through this process until today. And today it's quite clear that you do not represent the will of the people in terms of this because the majority is not supporting what you're trying to achieve. If you would please then come to the reality and go and look in terms of international best practice. What does countries that grow do? They guarantee property rights. They guarantee the rule of law. What you're trying to achieve is not going to succeed. It's going to be a failure today, and the Freedom Front Plus will definitely vote against this proposal. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Honourable members, let's hear Honourable Tring.
Honourable Deputy Speaker, allow me firstly to theologically correct the Honourable Mocheka. The original sin was man turning away from God. But this was perpetuated by 27 years of the current administration failing to properly and legally restore dispossessed land. The ACGP has always acknowledged the need for reformation and restitution of land. The question, however, is not in the why, but the how. We have consistently said that expropriation without compensation is not the panacea to the land question. Property rights must be protected because a failure to protect property rights and to issue title deeds to property owners or domestic business will not invest where there is no security for their assets. The ACDP agrees with the former President Kgalema Motlanthe, who, when he spoke in July 2019 at a dialogue on agricultural development, said, "If property understanding today will disappear because the kind of anarchy and chaos that would ensue is difficult to imagine. We cannot allow this to happen." It is the view of the ACDP that from a legal and constitutional perspective, it is not necessary to amend Section 25 of the Constitution. As the Constitution casing Restitution of Land Act, it protects property rights and also recognizes the need for the restoration of rights to those who have been dispossessed of their land. The problem was the failure to implement existing policy legislation, mainly due to incompetence, mismanagement, and corruption, particularly in the Department of Rural Development and Land Reform, as highlighted by both Kgalema Motlanthe high-level panel report, as well as the Special Investigation Unit report into the Department of Rural Development and Land Reform. From an ethical perspective, the ACDP supports orderly land reform and the restitution of land with compensation, understanding the need for fast resolutions to the land issue as land grabs escalate around the country. We must support as many South Africans as possible to gain access to land with title deeds while protecting all property rights and ensuring that just and equitable compensation is paid for any land that is expropriated. The ACDP commits to strengthening access to security of tenure as well as the freedom to acquire, utilize, rent, and sell property, including land. We must prioritize rural and agricultural development, guaranteeing food security, and assist small and emerging farmers to become commercially viable by having better access to finance and markets. We support a just, equitable, transparent, and corrupt-free land restitution process, believing that when we unite, build, and grow together, it is possible to enjoy a safe, healthy, and prosperous South Africa.
Thank you very much.
The ACDP does not support this amendment.
Honorable Hololisa.
Deputy Speaker and honorable members, the new South African Constitution was written as our societal and moral compass. It is, however, good that Parliament has finally taken time to consider the amendment of Section 25, which had caused so much hurt to the majority of South Africans, and that the National Assembly votes on it today. From the UDM's point of view, we are satisfied that our voice was heard and that the bill is in its current form. In its current form, does not put a time limit on the unfair dispossession of land. Should 1913 have been used as an initial cut-off date, whilst many indigenous people forcibly lost their land, long before then, it would have meant that this entire process was doomed to fail. In fact, that date should never ever be brought up in this context again. Mandiye Honorable Matsekha, inyani mhlekazi ilapha, i-liberation movement ziyezalwa ngaphambili, but njengoba kudla ngokuliwa kwamanye amazwe kulwela inkululeko, kuba khona ezindawo kuthiwa zi-liberated zones. Uthi ke ngoku lo indawo yenu uthi uyobhagena etafuleni unegotiate unendawo nayo. Problem apha esinayo apha kuthi kange sibe nayo lo luxury, akho ne-square inch of the land nayo nayiphi liberation movement enokuthi sa-liberata this piece of land eSouth Africa. So siye etafuleni size sithwele iminqwazi, sibokoze iminqwazi, siyocela sathi nalo constitution sesiyifumene sesine majority, sine majority 2/3 majority. sahlala phansi amenda constitution kwatyiwa imali njengisatyiwa ke njena ngoku lilonke mina into endayisuggesta yile ANC kakuhlale nezinye political parties ezizabantu bakuthi ke siphunga ikofu okwesibini make sizama uapproacha iBritain namaDutch la okokuba makasincedise kwifinances zolungisa umhlaba zo relocate umhlaba wabantu uye ebantwini abafuna uba ngamafama bakwazi uba bancediswe le into manje singxolelwa apha ehousing ngapha nangapha ngabantu abaprotector iprivileges abamanazo
Isikhathi General sesukuphelela isikhathi.
All right, bye bye.
Honorable members, sinikeze Honorable Zungula of the ATM.
Thank you, Speaker, Deputy Speaker. As the ATM, we want to express our utmost disappointment in the African National Congress and its collaborators for misleading the people of South Africa into thinking that today is a historic day to mark the amendment of Section 25 of the Constitution to effect land expropriation without compensation. The problem started in this House where the amended motion was converted into a resolution. The resolution adopted by the House betrayed the fundamentals as contained in the amended motion. In short, substituting expropriation without compensation with expropriation with nil compensation is the essence of the sham. The sham continued in the public hearings that were conducted countrywide until COVID-19 disrupted that program. Despite the overwhelming mandate by the people of South Africa in the initial public consultations, the second public consultations, it is where the sham was propagated. The Parliament Committee did not explain to the people of South Africa that the second consultation was meant to provide input into the bill. People were confused as to why they were being asked about what they'd already given mandate for, and some wishy-washy answer was given, and the bill was not even circulated, explained, or discussed. To therefore come here and claim that public consultations on the bill were conducted is pure lies and misrepresentation. As the ATM, we hold a strong and uncompromising view that passing this bill would be the biggest sellout action that this parliament would have done. Passing this bill means 5 things. Number one, the principle to compensate continues to be entrenched. Secondly, the market value considerations continue to be entrenched. Thirdly, courts decide if a case has been made or not for the so-called nil compensation. Number 4, Section 25, subsection 7 of the Constitution, which sets out the cutoff date for land redistribution and restitution as of 19 June 1913 onwards, remains intact, meaning all of the land that was robbed from our forefathers in the 1700s will remain in the hands of the land robbers. Section 25, subsection 7 of the Constitution in its current form sanitizes land looting. In our written submission as the ATM, we have proposed that 19 June 1913 date be backdated to 6 April 1652, when Jan van Riebeeck first set foot in South Africa. In conclusion, Deputy Speaker, ATM is pleading with the ANC to withdraw the bill, go back to the drawing board. This bill must be withdrawn and sent back to the people of South Africa for their input to achieve the mandate they've been given. As the ATM, we are offering our votes and our support on a bill that is genuine, a bill that will benefit the people of South Africa, not into esibonayo.
Thank you.
Umhlaba makabuye ebantwini balapha eSouth Africa. Enkosi.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The next speaker is the Honourable August.
Thank you, Chair. Our country has a painful land history. Colonial and apartheid laws were the weapons of land dispossession for the majority and land enrichment for the minority. That is the pattern of land ownership that persists today. It is an immoral and unjust pattern. Good agrees that there is an urgent need to accelerate land reform and to address the spatial and economic injustices of dispossession and landlessness. And good agree that expropriation is a legitimate tool to fix these injustices. Expropriation is nothing new. Expropriation of farms, homes, land, and movables went on for decades. It was enabled by the laws of a hateful regime who created a system that was declared a crime against humanity. Expropriation by the state continued under the current 1975 Expropriations Act, and that the state's right to expropriate property for public purpose and in the public interest was included in the new South African Constitution. Expropriation by all three spheres of government has continued throughout the democratic era. In practice, political parties who today oppose expropriation as a legitimate tool to achieve land reform continue to expropriate land where they are in government. The question of expropriation without compensation is already settled law. Section 25 of the Constitution already provides that no compensation may be paid if it's just and equitable. There is therefore no need to amend the Constitution to achieve a just, equitable and accelerated land reform program that includes no compensation when appropriate. Chair, the 18th Amendment Bill is intended to make explicit that which is implicit. But the interpretation of the Section 25 of the Constitution has already been confirmed by the Constitutional Court 2002. In the case of the First National Bank of South Africa Limited versus the Minister of Finance, the Constitutional Court said that there are appropriate circumstances where it is permissible for legislation in the broader public interest to deprive persons of property without payment of compensation. The Minister of Public Works and Infrastructure recently published a bill to amend the law of general application, the Expropriation Act, to excessively provide for the circumstances under no compensation would be just and equitable. We must adopt that bill and get on with it. Our failure to adequately address land reform is not a failure of the Constitution and in particular Section 25. Good supports the need to urgently speed up our land reform program. Good does not support the amendment to the Constitution because it's unnecessary, because expropriation with no compensation is already provided for in Section 25 of the Constitution as it is now. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The next speaker is the Honourable Masipa. Continue, Honourable Member. Don't.
House Chair, the tabling of the report to amend the Constitution to allow expropriation without compensation comes at a critical time in our country's agricultural sector. Both black and white farmers are concerned about their security of tenure because of the proposed amendment of the Constitution. The financiers are already taking a cautious approach in their support of farmers because of the ill-conceived proposed expropriation without compensation threat to security of tenure. The investors have already left the land bank because they could not withstand the uncertainty created by this constitutional amendment, amongst other things. It is house to let at the moment. The institution is clueless at the moment with no strategic direction. The gross ineptitude of the African National Congress have progressively led to many black farmers' failures in the agriculture and land reform. Today, the same organization is leading this country towards poverty and hunger. Let us call a spade a spade. When the EFF actions its radical fantasies in this house, the whole of the ANC follows without question. We are debating the amendment of the Constitution because the President of the country is caught between increasing fractions party from disintegrating and appeasing an intransigent EFF. It was clear in our committee deliberation on the bill that ANC comrades did not have a clue as to what is wrong with the Constitution. The real problem faced by black farmers under the failing ANC government is ANC corruption. Crime, poor uncoordinated farmer support, farm inputs inflation, lack of market access, failing agriculture SOE, and the lack of customized financing institutions. The corrupt ANC government's problems are being compounded by the need to appease a coterie of upstarts from the EFF, Good, and ATM, who now seek to call the shots through scaremongering policies. Mr. President, appeasing these political babies and the RET forces in your party is going to lead to the destruction of food security and commercial agriculture in this country. The Section 25 Constitution is not the problem. The problem is the ANC corruption. The litany of problems faced by black farmers can be summarized as follows: poor financial support, the bankrupt Water Affairs Department, the uncoordinated farmer support, poor biosecurity, corruption in the agricultural SOE, demise of the land bank, and the land reform failures. In conclusion, emerging farmers are faced with litany of problems. It took the DA to secure Mr. Ragase a farm after the ANC government spent years trying to dispossess him of his land. To the Red Beret, it is broken and unequal education system that is perpetuating poverty and inequality. To the failing ANC, it is your corruption and your inability to realize and enforce the rights set out in the Constitution and not the Constitution. The inability to issue more water licenses have failed the land reform dismally. There is absolutely nothing implicit in the Constitution that needs to be explicit to make the government to do what it needs to do. The DA rejects this amendment and calls on all members in this House who value the rule of law and this country's economic future to join us in rejecting this amendment. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Member. I now recognize the Honourable Minister. We'll just give them opportunity just to sanitize the area. I now call upon the Honourable Minister of Justice and Correctional Services.
Thank you very much, House Chairperson, honorable members, fellow South Africans, the President of the Republic and the Deputy President. Today we continue to set in motion a process to consolidate and complete a journey that was initiated by Solomon Plaatje, the first General Secretary of the South African
Honourable Minister, may I just request the Honourable Deputy Minister of Home Affairs to switch off his microphone, please. It's disturbing your speech. Please proceed, Honourable Minister.
The first major campaign of the South African Native National Congress, the predecessor of the ANC, was against the Glen Grey Act of 1894, which was consolidated into the Land Act of 1913, a measure that drastically dispossessed and curtailed the right of Africans to own or occupy land throughout the Union. Today we stand to complete that which Nkosi Bambata died for. Today we stand to complete the fight against the original sin of land dispossession, which led 87% of the population to be living under 13% of the land. The forces on the extreme left and the extreme right who stand opposed to progressive policies, their entanglement will be exposed today. When forces in the extreme left and the extreme right converge against the people, it is a counter-revolution. In this entanglement, the EFF, the DA, and the Freedom Front Plus pretend not to be in the same bed. They behave like couples who have celebrated Lobola, yet they tell the whole world they are not married. How ironic that they vote together in local government. They've pronounced that they will vote together today to oppose the bill. Yet they continue to tell the people of this country that they are not coalition partners. It is clear that this entanglement has graduated into a coalition. They are agreeing on everything, including to oppose land reform. From the African claims, the Freedom Charter, Ready to Govern, and the RDP, the ANC always advocated for equitable distribution of land to the people of this country. Our land reform program is anchored on the following three pillars: the restitution of land rights that has been dispossessed in terms of the colonial laws, improvement of security of tenure for those whose land rights were weakened by apartheid laws, and land redistribution. Presently, data from government and academia present a wide gap, with the government suggesting that the land transferred from white South Africans to fellow black people from 1994 to 2020 is roughly 11%, while some economists suggest that we've made progress to around 20%. Government has recently released an additional 700,000 hectares of land to beneficiaries of land reform. While the land reform program has been slow, there has been some progress. Some of the challenges experienced during the implementation of the land reform program since 1994 are the following: exorbitant land prices and protracted negotiation to settle claims, complexities of settling rural land claims in the absence of documented evidence, fraudulent claims, non-disclosure by claimants, and completing claims on the same piece of property. It is against this background that expropriation without compensation must be one of the policy instruments which must be availed to the state to accelerate land reform. The ANC resolved at its 54th National Conference to expropriate land without compensation in order to give effect to land reform and redistribution. The expropriating authority performing an expropriation exercise public power, and by that virtue is bound by the rules of administrative laws. Issues of procedural fairness, reasonableness, legality, and proportionality are applicable. The process of arriving at the amount of compensation must be rationally connected to the purpose. The courts have timelessly remarked that the means must justify the end. The essence of the ANC 54th National Conference resolution is to expropriate land without paying for it under certain conditions. International property law, which binds South Africa, recognizes nil compensation. It is against this background that we support the wording on the bill of nil compensation. As it is practice, it will mean the same as expropriation without compensation. And it is accepted across the globe. The ANC advocates for a multiple land tenure of ownership system, where the state will own land for its own use or to lease. Natural and juristic persons will equally be afforded an opportunity to freehold, or what is commonly known as title deeds. Communal land will also be recognized to ensure security of tenure. South Africa is a mixed economy. Hence, our land tenure ownership system should mirror our social and economic construct. It should also facilitate economic or social participation by any landholder. One form of land tenure will not suit our unique social construct. In fact, honorable members, most countries across the globe have multiple forms of tenure on land ownership, including China, which has got ownership by the state and also by communities. China is also developing towards protecting private rights, and that was done in the Constitution in 2004. In order to create an egalitarian society, to speed up land reform, restore the dignity of our people, and redress the injustices of the past, the ANC support the report of the Ad hoc Committee and the proposed constitutional 18th Amendment Bill. The amendment bill is in line with the long-held ANC historic positions on the land reform. We support the bill as it will add into the arsenal or tools in the toolbox for our land reform legislation. The 18th Amendment Bill in Section 25 of the Constitution will make explicit that which is implicit in the Constitution. All jurisdictions across the globe have an expropriation instrument. In the United States, they call it the eminent domain or the taking law. Many other jurisdictions call it expropriation. I hope Honorable Steenhuisen is listening. In all these jurisdictions, the issue of compensation, just, nil, or without, has been debated by legislators, jurists, economists, and society at large. Therefore, as a country, we are not barbarians in debating this matter. To the DA and the AFF+, expropriation is even in those countries you admire, like the United States of America and the Great Britain. All countries of the world have an instrument of expropriation. In all jurisdictions, land reform policies evolve. In some of the countries where the revolution came through war or violent takeover like China and Mozambique, they expropriated land without compensation during the transition period. But today in both countries, any expropriation is accompanied by compensation. Zimbabwe was a negotiated settlement on the land question. They later expropriated without compensation. Today they are in the process of compensating the farmers from whom they expropriated the land without compensation. As South Africa in 1994, we chose a path of a negotiated settlement, where land reform will go through a due process. Therefore, our policies on land reform must be transparent, must be on the just and equitable basis. There must be due process to arrive at nil compensation, and that is what the bill is doing. Due to land hunger, which is more pronounced in urban areas, due to rapid urbanization, the land must also be distributed to those who need it. Honorable members, we want to warn against the opportunistic approach to land reform. The coalition partners of the DA and the FF+, the EFF, want us to believe that custodianship is the silver bullet to land reform. In the context of expropriation without compensation, the Agri-SA case is important. The case dealt with the question whether certain deprivation caused by regime change in rights in certain resources amounted to an expropriation. The Constitutional Court found that on the specific facts in front of it, such a deprivation of property does not amount to a compensation, to a compensable expropriation, since the state does not acquire any property. From the Agri-SA judgment, we know now that it's possible to vest custodianship over minerals without passing ownership, because there are no title deeds to begin with. But that is not the same with the land, which is regulated by title deeds or freehold. With the land, you will need to first deprive the landowner to vest custodianship to the state. The ANC-led government has a practical understanding of state land ownership or custodianship, as government has administered land on behalf of the state. In various spheres of government, the state-owned entities and communal land, which is under state custodianship. Therefore, the state custodianship is nothing new to us, nor a res nova as claimed by the EFF. The government has also transferred land ownership from the state to beneficiaries of land reform. We have also leased land to beneficiaries of our land acquisition policy, and we know the challenges our people faced in this regard. Majority of beneficiaries of the redistribution program prefer freehold, as it facilitates economic participation and does not render them perpetual minors at the behest of the state. Like the Tafelkop community, who fought for 25 years to receive their titles. The Freedom Charter calls for land to be shared amongst those who work it, not the state. Land reform is meant to restore the dignity and the economic power of those dispossessed by the apartheid and the colonial governments to change ownership patterns. State custodianship will be a hollow victory, as it still denies the dispossessed the full economic benefits and dignity of owning their land. It also does not change the ownership patterns. Disconcertingly, we will have to explain to future generations why, instead of unraveling the Glen Grace legacy, we choose to endorse and implement it. We will be called upon to answer why our actions mirror the words of colonialists like John Scott, who styled himself as the Lieutenant Governor of Natal, who said, and I quote, "An uncivilized person is not easily brought to understand the value of written titles. Rightly to comprehend such a question requires an experience only obtainable by a considerable amount of social progress on his own part. And until he acquired such an improved status, no title could be given to him which did not contain provisions necessary to guard him against his own ignorance and the superior knowledge of those around him." Close quote. This was closed by this governor. So the EFF wants to take us back to the upheaval ages of the 1800s. The road that the economic freedom fighters want us to walk on is not only dangerous, it is backward. It is antithesis of economic freedom and democracy. Our land problem is not characterized by lack of state ownership. It is compounded by the lack of security of tenure for the majority of our citizens. Our people throughout the public hearings demanded to own their land themselves, not the state. We can't, as this House, give them less secure form of tenure. In reality, even those who are beneficiaries and the black people who have succeeded in buying land on their own means in the open market through the fruits of their labor will be deprived by the land reform model of the EFF. With a stroke of a pen, people in the township like Soweto, Atteridgeville, Wamashu, Ligazi, Sishiko, to name just a few, will wake up being tenants of the state. They will have to lease their land like they did under apartheid, thereby being rendered perpetual minors of the state. Those who worked hard over years to get freehold, who were under the Bantu Administration Act, will surely feel betrayed by a government for taking them back into apartheid, for rendering them perpetual minors, and that their assets must be administered for them by the state. The community of black people who hold title deeds are not an insignificant minority. The leasehold system has already been declared by our courts as unconstitutional in the Ingwenyama Trust matter. We will not be fooled by the EFF revolutionary-sounding rhetoric that is counter-revolutionary. The cult of the EFF can only fool its members who believe everything that comes from their supreme leader as gospel truth. They will flood Twitter to concur, even if he can tell them that the township of Soweto is in Mpumalanga, it is no longer in Gauteng. Honorable members, all progressive forces must support the 18th Constitutional Amendment Bill. The state must ensure that access to land is equitable. Some of us have not been shouting from stages. We have been working to create policy framework for expropriation with nil compensation. There is no silver bullet or one legislative instrument that can solve our land reform challenges. We need a myriad of policies and legislation to resolve this challenge. For us to create or facilitate the growth of the working class to a rural middle class or to grow the black middle class, the forms of tenure must link both of them into the mainstream of the economy. This House has in its midst the expropriation bill. The expropriation bill 2019 says the circumstances under which land may be expropriated with nil compensation. For instance, where land is occupied by labor tenants, where land is unused but only kept to generate an income from its appreciation, where land is abandoned and poses health and physical risk to the people, the circumstances can be expanded. You also have in your midst the Land Court Bill, which will help us to resolve land disputes and develop land jurisprudence. The Department of Rural Development will also soon process the Redistribution Bill. The high-level panel report has shown us that for us to accelerate our land reform program, we need to promulgate a redistribution bill that will help us resolve land hunger. The department is also processing the Communal Land Rights Act that will guarantee security of tenure for people under communal land. Financial institutions should be able to give access to money or resources when security of tenure is guaranteed in communal land. In this way, we can unlock the economic potential of land held under communal system. All the above bills will be adopted, Honorable Steenhuisen, by this House. With or without your support, with your coalition partners, the EFF, the DA, and the Freedom Front Plus. We call upon all South Africans to join hands in the land reform program for equitable distribution of the land. It is in the interest of everyone, black and white, that land reform succeed. The skewed patterns of land ownership are not sustainable. They are not to the benefit of anyone. To all South Africans, the ANC support the 18th Amendment Bill, which is anchored on giving people the land, as per the call of the Freedom Charter. As Mama Africa, Miriam Makeba sang, "Kudala sinyamezele, lifikile ixesha lenkululeko yethu. Manyani ngoku, alisekho ixesha lokulila. Mayibuye ngoku iAfrika. Silela ize lakowethu, elathathwa ngabamhlophe. Sesifuna inkululeko." Ndiyabulela.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. The next speaker is the Honourable Sheikh Imam.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Chairperson, allow me to start off by extending our condolences to the family of the farm worker who was gunned down allegedly by a farm owner outside Paarl a few days ago. Now, Chairperson, let me start off by saying we must agree that the current legislation does allow for expropriation without compensation. But let me also add, Chairperson, that if there's anyone in this country that is the rightful heirs to the land of this country, then it has to be the Khoi, San and the Bushmen, the first indigenous nation in this particular country. Now, what has given rise to us to come here today to debate this bill, Chairperson? It is as a result of our failure or the limited progress that we have made, because the Section 25 in the Constitution provides for expropriation without compensation. But Chairperson, while we are debating what happened many, many years ago, currently as we speak right now, Chairperson, people's rights are being violated, people are being evicted mercilessly, and very little or nothing is being done about it. Prime land is being sold to ensuring that we give back the identity and dignity to our people by providing them with land in this country. That is not happening. If you talk about the Khoi San, you talk about the people of District 6, and you talk about the people in rural land under the Ngonyama Trust, all these people continue to have their rights violated. The National Freedom Party will never support the nationalization of land in South Africa. So for those political parties that are talking about nationalization, you will not get our support. We believe this would affect the rights of individuals to own their own land and their own property. And having said that, Chairperson, we must be very careful as to what bills we pass in the future. As we know, there's a lot of instability in this country currently, and the decisions we make today may come back to impact negatively on house owners and landowners in the years to come. Now, Chairperson, let me go one step further. We talk about compensation. Yes, indeed. There was no talk about compensation many years ago when our people had their rights violated and they were forcefully removed from prime land or the length and breadth of this country. Suddenly we talk about wanting to give nil compensation, and in my understanding it's exactly the same thing as expropriation without compensation. We believe that in right of the fact that one's identity and dignity dictates who you are, that land should be provided to all citizens of South Africa.
Your time is expired.
But Chairperson, we must not take the land from one and give it to the other.
Your time has expired. Thank you.
Is my time up, Chairperson? Thank you very much.
Some time ago already.
Thank you, Chair.
The next speaker is the Honourable Madisha.
Thank you.
Thank you. Land restitution is extremely important. In fact, land and land tenure transformation ought to have happened more than a quarter of a century ago after the adoption of the country's constitution. But because that transformation did not happen, today South Africans are faced with, among others, the daily importation of food that goes to beyond 100 billion rand. Racism and human torture still continue, that the majority of South Africans cannot afford. But the question that we need to ask ourselves is who is responsible for that whole thing? The present government has not done that which it was supposed to do. There is a lot of land. That is, one, the land that is not being used. Two, land that is not being used to its full potential. Three, land that was left by those who ran away when democracy arrived. Four, and even more, massive land in the hands of the few today. All these wrongs must be corrected, given that many decisions are taken but never implemented. like what we are here discussing today, COPE calls for an urgent land audit, which shall be followed by a proper redistribution, but not theft, not corruption, but to ensure that South Africans do not fall into the incorrect basket, such as it happened wrongly in Zimbabwe. A COPE says a 10-point plan must be adopted. That plan will include a full audit of all the 9 provincial land reform offices and the more than 36 operational regions. The role, the governance and functioning of the land bank, the land redistribution for agricultural development program, which must be equipped to inter alia help all the previously disadvantaged people to become landowners and farmers so that they can play advantageous role for both themselves and all the other poor people in the country. The poor but new landowners must be helped with the capacity to participate in equity schemes so that they can be allowed to access grants to buy into agricultural enterprise. But more has got to be done. I want to say that more was supposed to have been done by this committee that gave the report, but more was not done by this committee that gave the report. Therefore, more has got to be done by them. Please go back and do more. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honourable Member. All the Honourable Members, the next speaker is the Honourable Obama.
Ngiyabulisa kumhlali ngaphambili nabantu baseMzantsi Afrika jikelele. Ingxoxo yanamhlanje kulendlu yowiso-mthetho ingebill enenjongo zokutshintshwa komgaqo-siseko ukulungiselela ukuxuthwa komhlaba ngaphandle kwembuyekezo. Si-Democratic Alliance asivumelani nale bill ngezi zizathu zilandelayo. Xa kuthethwa ngokuxuthwa komhlaba uthethwa ngawo wonke umhlaba eMzantsi Afrika nalo indlu yakho yakhiwe phezu kwawo, nokokuba usedolophini, usezilalini okanye usezifama. Ifuna wonke umhlaba apha eMzantsi ube phansi korhulumente ze abemi belilizwe ba-aplaye kuloo rhulumente worhwaphilizo xa befuna indawo yokuhlala okanye indawo yokushishinela. Into ethetha ukuba akukho mntu oya kuba ne-title deed yendawo yakhe. Ukhongoloseke yena ke ebecace kwasekomitini ukuba the tail is wagging the dog, sitsho isiNgesi. Mandibuze bahlali, njengokuba le nkululeko ifumaneke nzima kangaka ngegazi lezihlwele, niza kuvuma ke ngoku ukuba ilungelo lenu lokuba ngostandi nomastandi bemihlaba yenu loxuthwe yi-EFF ne-ANC? Kutheni ningazukuba nee-title deeds phansi kwalo rhulumente enithi ngurhulumente wenkululeko? Kutheni lento kungazukuxuthwa, kuza kuxuthwa wonke umhlaba nalo wezindlu zenu enizisebenzele nzima? Ufuneke niye kwi-ANC okanye kurhulumente waloo mini nicele imvume kuloo rhulumente wohlohle sakhe, urhulumente we-corruption, urhulumente we-cater deployment, xa nizokwenza nantoni na edibene nemihlaba. Abantu bacinga uba kuza kuxuthwa umhlaba wamafama amhlophe kuphela. Nokuba kunganjalo, nicinga uba lo rhulumente uzakwazi ukwahlula lo mhlaba ngendlela efanelekileyo eza konezisa wonke umntu? Okanye ezo fama ziza kunikwa oogxa babo njengesiqhelo? Vuka mhlali waseMzantsi, sisuka kwingcinezelo ye-apartheid government, ngoku nifuna ukuzifaka kwingcinezelo yabantu abafana nani kodwa abangenaxesha lenu, bangenaxesha lamalungelo enu, njengokuba sibonile kule minyaka eyi-28 idlulile. Zifundeleni usection 25 we-Constitution okanye umgaqo-siseko waseMzantsi Afrika, nizokuzibonela ukuba akukho sizathu sokutshintsha kwanto kule section ukuze umcimbi wokulungiswa kwe-historical injustices zomhlaba ufezekiswe. CDA sithi kuninzi okunokwenziwa, masitshane nje ukulungisa izinto.
All right, we'll go back to that. It's the National Assembly there debating Section 25 of the Constitution on expropriation without compensation. Conversations about equitable distribution of land rights weakened by apartheid laws. That was said by Minister Ronald Lamula, also saying that amending Section 25 will speed up land reform and give people dignity, and also talking about a myriad of legislative tools that are needed to solve the land issue. Let's go back then to the National Assembly as they continue their debate on Section 25 of the Constitution.
Your time is expired.
Difundeleni umgaqo siseko ngaphambi kokuvuma ingxelo eza kunenza nicenezeleke nangaphezulu kwakuqala. Onendlela uvile.
The next speaker is the Honorable Nyonso.
The return of the land from colonial conquest is not a matter for debate. It is an imperative of the national liberation struggle. Land is synonymous with the dignity of a people. It is the territorial right of the indigenous people who, in our case, have fought with the foreign invaders to preserve their birthright and human dignity. In the Act of 1909, the British government turned African people into pariah in their own land, giving the lie and falsehood that they found an empty land. The PAC and the African people cannot accept such injustice of a usurped land that continues to be in the hands of the settler community. Land is not a commodity that can be owned by individuals. The expropriation of land without compensation grants white people and their blood-stained title deeds the ownership and the legitimacy to our land. We call for the return of the land. We call for the repossession of every square inch of our land. We call for the land restoration. It deserves better.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The next speaker is the Honourable Hendricks.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chair. Honourable Chair, it is sad that the ANC and EFF did not show leadership on the eve of this debate. There cannot be a demand for protection of property rights in South Africa if 90% of property has been forcibly taken or favourably sold to whites, given by King Edward and Winston Churchill, and condoliant powers to whites, both English-speaking and Afrikaners. The ANC is the only substantial political party left over from the liberation movement and best placed to get forcibly stolen land back. That's why South Africans all over the country supported this 18th Amendment in large numbers, and that's why Al-Jamaa supports the amendment as amended. Al-Jamaa is grateful for the leadership of the chair of the ad hoc committee, and future generations of Africans will forever be grateful to him for taking historical steps to get our land back from whites who do not want to return 1 inch of land. For Muslims, Waqf land and properties cannot be in the hands of the South African state. Left to the control of the trustees appointed and the community it serves. Sacred land like this for many cultural groups should not be in the hands of the state or entities like the CRL. The Department of Public Works has control of sacred land in posh white areas, and they sign it off for administration by white estate agents. Sacred rituals cannot then be held at these gated sites. Government must be ashamed of itself. Public Works must hang its head in shame. Al-Jamaa cannot agree that all land must be in the hands of the state. Jan van Riebeeck did not steal or forcibly take land from Africans as we know them today, but violently took land from the Nama tribal house, the Khoi and the San. On Heritage Day, I joined the descendants of at Big Bay near Blobeckstrand to the exact site where Van Riebeeck landed. big pay must be given back or rent paid for the land to the Nama nation. Whites did not pay reparations for generations while they accrued benefit from apartheid. These stolen land, some expropriated and ridiculously low prices are confiscated in the best interest of justice. And for starters, cut up in sites of 100 square meters with no zoning restrictions and allocated to voters as they turn 18 years with a title deed. Africans eyeing confiscated land must understand that the koi and the sand and slave descendants must be first in the queue for confiscated land. Al-Jamaa supports the 18th Amendment. Thank you very much, Honourable House Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The next speaker is the Honourable Breitenbach.
Nice to see you too. Honourable Chair, Honourable Members, the debate today on the Constitution 18th Amendment Bill is an incredibly important debate on so many levels and for so many reasons. The issue of land and the issue of land reform touches each South African. It goes to the very core of our being. It encapsulates in essence all those attributes that made us the miracle nation of 1994. This debate, the outcome thereof, and the process of dealing with this bill has laid bare all of those emotions that we, as a nation, mostly separately, worked through in the run-up to the 1994 elections. Today, honourable members, we must remember how we felt on the 27th of April 1994. We must remember that we represent not ourselves with our narrow interests, but every single person who lives in South Africa and their multiplicity of interests. We must, today, act in only the best interests of South Africa and South Africans. We must not lose sight of the fact that in 1994 we undertook to build a new South Africa, one in which human dignity was paramount and in which we wanted to enable a prosperous, dignified life for all South Africans, in which the Constitution was supreme and the rule of law upheld. Unfortunately, things have not turned out quite as we expected. The road to prosperity has been turned into the dirt track of unfettered corruption, theft and greed. A small group have been turned into overnight billionaires, while the rest are left to struggle, eke out a daily living and break under the massive burden of supporting a country with an ever-shrinking tax base. For 28 years, meaningful land reform has been ignored. No effort has been made to address the pressing issue by the governing party. It has been kicked around like the proverbial football, hauled out when it is politically expedient to do so to score cheap points for the electorate, and then thrown into the back of the cupboard immediately after elections. This is akin to playing with live ammunition. There can be no good ending to it. This bill that we are debating today is ill-conceived, the product of a deeply flawed process that will not stand up to constitutional scrutiny. It has been made so by a process that itself was deeply flawed from the outset, I suspect by design. Offered as bait to the electorate, there was never any discernible will on the part of the governing party and some others to deal effectively, fairly and empathetically with a very complex question of land reform. Public input was dealt with in a perfunctory manner. Subject matter experts were treated with suspicion and disdain. While we had the opportunity to deal responsibly with a matter that affects each and every South African in a manner that would result in meaningful, effective and progressive land reform that would impact positively on the lives of all South Africans, some parties used the opportunity to score cheap political points. This is nothing short of tragic. It is not what we were sent here to do. We must, honourable members, oppose this flawed, dangerous and superficial piece of legislation. It does not, in even the most simplistic way, address the need for meaningful land reform in South Africa. It is not the answer to the land reform question. I'm getting there. South Africans deserve so much better. We must, as a matter of extreme urgency, when this bill has failed, embark on a process that will address the land reform issue. Listen carefully. On an honest and fair basis that will result in fair and equitable land in redistribution that will respect the Constitution, uphold the rule of law, and meet the needs of our citizens and allow for increased food security, underpin property rights and grow our economy, not destroy it. We must and we can develop a process by which all South Africans have access to land and the dignity that accompanies that, but in a way that encourages investment, both foreign and local, and satisfies the desires of South Africans. The Democratic Alliance would very much like to be part of such a process. The contribution of the ANC in this debate is the perfect explanation of why this process is fundamentally flawed. To entrust the chairpersonship of such a technical process to someone who is clearly not living in the same reality as ordinary South Africans like the Honourable Motshekga doomed the process from the start. His unilateral decision to give fresh meaning to inputs by participants in the public hearings in itself fatally wounded the process. Add to this his statement today that it is unfortunate that white members are allowed to vote in this debate. And the veil of intellectualism pretends to wear gives the lie to the ramblings of an ailing cadre whose presence personifies the ANC as an outdated movement stuck in the past. The DA does not support this bill. I thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is the Honourable Mashlatsi. Honourable Mashlatsi. Order, honourable members.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, Ministers, Deputy Ministers, Members of Parliament. When the late General Secretary of the South African Communist Party, Comrade Chris Hani, walked out of CODESA negotiation, he said, "I didn't go to prison. I wasn't jumping around on the streets. I was in the forefront of the MK soldiers. I was one of the first to cross the Zambezi River. I saw the blood of our people flowing like a river. They didn't die fighting for a freedom of movement, but they died for the land." Honourable Chairperson, allow me to greet you in the name of landless millions of fellow South Africans who were forcefully and brutally moved from their land following the formation of the White-only Union of South Africa in 1910. Which formalized the land theft and dispossession through Native Land Act of 1913, in terms of which the criminal law against humanity, white people criminally acquired 93% of the land, while black people were given only 7%. Not only did the desperate and forced removal of African people under colonialism and apartheid resulted in polarization of the South Africa society along racial lines, but also in extreme land shortages, insecure land rights, and mass poverty for African people. This onslaught left millions of South Africans poor and landless. We reiterate with renewed conviction that the land of our forebears was stolen and it must be returned. And the ANC, as the ANC, we are resolute on the amendment of Section 25 of the Constitution in order to redress the historical injustice of the past, with what President Cyril Ramaphosa has called the original sin. The ANC, since its formation, has fought for the return of the land to its rightful owners. The resolution on land question in South Africa is central to the achievement of the National Democratic Society. It requires us to reflect critically and honestly to the impact of the transformative legislation. The mandate of our committee to initiate and introduce legislation amending Section 25 of the Constitution was made to make explicit that which is implicit in Section 25 in order to allow for the expropriation of land without compensation. Chairperson, land is a very emotive issue. It is delicate and must be treated with such. South Africa is rated the most unequal society in the world, with poverty and landless bearing a black battered face. The vast majority of black South Africans are land hungry and now land thirsty. In order to eradicate the vestiges of colonialism and apartheid from our democracy, the ANC in its 2019 election manifesto recommitted itself to carry out sustainable land reform program that will expand participation in and ownership of agricultural production, advance food security, and help reverse the apartheid spatial patterns. The ANC remains vigilant and responsible not to lay our people towards a process that will collapse the economy and the country. Chairperson, in the spirit of unity and cohesion, the ANC initiated and led bilaterals with political parties to clarify its position and find common ground. There are different false narratives peddled against the ANC position. And on the amendment of Section 25 of the Constitution, I will reflect briefly on them by giving correct narrative of the ANC position on the land question. During the bilaterals, the DA and FF Plus maintained their historical right-wing posture. They continue to vehemently reject the submission of the ANC. They care less about the people of Alexandra, Guguletu, Kailicha, Caleb Mutsari, and everywhere else where our people are subjected to vintages of colonial and apartheid legacy. Instead of contributing meaningfully to the democratic process, they choose to constantly threaten the parliament, to take parliament to court and challenge the amendment of Section 25. They have no reason to challenge the legitimate and democratic process meant to atone the original sin. Theirs is to rule the country through the back door of threats. They threatened to take this process to court from day one. The ACDP had no prayer for the original sin and chose to remain mouthpiece of the right-wing element. They were no different from the FF Plus. Even the words of Archbishop Tutu could not knock consciousness to their hearts when he said, when missionaries came to Africa, they had the Bible and we had the land. They said, let us pray. We closed our eyes. When we opened our eyes, we had the Bible, they had our land. If Honorable Mishra's party cannot at least borrow wisdom from the Archbishop Tutu, the man of cloth, what more can be done? Even Isaiah chapter 1 verse 17 says, learn to do good, seek justice, correct oppression, bring justice to the fatherless. Repeat after me, Muruti. Correct oppression. IFP said nothing, Honorable Chairperson, absolutely nothing. Theirs is that their approach on land question is the Ingonyama Trust. Anything else doesn't matter. Chairperson, the EFF stands here. Chairperson, the EFF stands here and boldly lied to the nation that the ANC is not willing to implement its resolution on the land question. They have appointed themselves as spokesperson of the ANC on matters of national importance. The ANC has no clear the EFF has no clear policy direction. They have a slogan as Jiggy, land and jobs, with a chorus of nationalization of the land, but no clear policy. We met more with the EFF than any other political party during bilaterals. We met more with the EFF more
order,
than
honorable members, order.
They just came to display that the resolution of the ANC on the land question. They came with demands, heavily armed with rigid position and high level of unwillingness to negotiate, even when balance of evidence was not in their favor. They dislike anything progressive and they are very prone to anarchy. Chairperson, EFF is a victim of its own making, a result of their own misplaced ideological tool of analysis, a child concoction of what they have termed Marxist-Leninism, Fanonism, and have of recent dropped to Pan-Africanism, Steve Bikoism, Thomas Sankarism from those tools. They move from one ideological theory to the other. Today they don't want the DA, tomorrow they impose themselves on the DA. These ones can never be us with the revolution. Amika Cabral had the likes of the EFF in his mind when he said, hide nothing from the masses of our people, tell no lies, expose lies whenever they are told, mask no difficulties, mistakes, failures, claim no easy victories. Today, we had nothing but cries of easy victories from the red seekers. We differed with the EFF on 3 issues, Chairperson, on state custodianship, on nil compensation, and the 1913 land cut-off date on Land Act. Now, let me clarify these issues. On state custodianship, the EFF maintained their position that all land. We asked them about the security of 10 and freehold title. When each and every South African can have a right to total ownership of the land, then they came up with a concept of quasi-custodianship, an indication that the ideological tools of analysis are blunt. Fellow South African, quasi-custodianship means that the state can allocate through contractual agreement. However, it does not give guarantee to security of tenure. It therefore means the state can remove anyone as long as it can justify its deeds. The quasi-custodianship is nothing but a modern apartheid regime scam. This is what apartheid has done to our people. It removed them from the prime and lucrative land to barren land. Honorable Chairperson, we rejected their proposal and maintained the true spirit of our charter, precisely because the fundamental basis of all wealth and power is the ownership and acquisition of freehold title to land. These are the words of Dr. A.B. Uma, the elected president of the ANC in 1940, during the presidential address on the 14th of December 1941. Fellow South Africans, you have a right to land as stipulated in the Bill of Rights. The ANC is not confused. We cannot continue to distribute title deeds into our people and still hold the land, the very same land, on their behalf. Honorable Chairperson, on the compensation, at no point did the ANC propose text to the amendment or Section 25 speaks of compensation. Instead, we speak of nil compensation. The ANC's choice in the usage of nil compensation is in line with acceptable global standards and informed by international and constitutional prescribes. And the Constitution prescribes that we take such into consideration. I hope Honorable Tring is listening. Had they read the amendment carefully, without emotion, they would have known that consideration or compensation is for improvements, not on the land. Honorable Chairperson, the ANC acknowledges that the 1913 Land Act creates a monster. Actually, Act created a monster that formalized the land theft and dispossession in our country. However, in the spirit of equality, given the shortage of land and land hunger, the land theft and dispossession in our country. However, in the spirit of equality, given the shortage of land and land hunger, redistribution of the land remains the best alternative to anchor our land reform program. The land has exchanged many hands numerous times for that matter, and based on the balance of evidence and the backlog on land claims, the removal of 1913 Land Act will regress the objective of our land reform program. However, the ANC has not closed any further engagement on subsection 7 of Section 25. Honorable Chairperson, the realization of expropriation of land without compensation does not end with the amendment of Section 25 of the Constitution. This is one of mechanisms that will enable the state to realize its land reform policy objectives. For us in the ANC, we'll forge ahead with a progressive land reform program, making effective implementation of its three pillars: restitution, redistribution, and security of land tenure. We take this debate on land question as part of a continuous program. Honorable Speaker, Honorable Chairperson, apologies. Allow me to speak to the caucus of the ANC led by the Chief Whip, Comrade Castalina Pemi Majudin. I know how you feel, comrades, but I want you to remember the words of Thabo Mbeki when he said, gloom and despondency have never defeated adversity. Trying times need courage, resilience, our strength as people in...
Honourable Member, will you just take your seat, please? Why are you rising, Honourable Member?
House Chairperson, I was just wondering if the Honourable Member at the podium would take a question about being...
Honourable Member, are you prepared to take a question?
Two properties.
Honourable Member, I didn't give you permission to ask the question. Honourable Member, are you prepared to take...
not.
So
there's no question. Please take your seat. Honourable Chief Whip of the Opposition, you know the rules. And you know you're transgressing the rules now. Continue, Honourable Member.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Gloom and despondency have never defeated adversity. Trying times need courage and resilience. Our strength as people is not tested during the best of times. Fellow South Africans, there comes a time when slogans do not matter, when singing revolutionary songs do not matter. This is a time when numbers do matter. No political party commands absolute 2/3 majority in this House.
South Africa.
This is the time to see who are the true revolutionaries of our people. The 230 battalion of the ANC is here. The sons and daughters of John Langalibalele Dube, the first president of the ANC, are ready to hand over the land of Yehova to its rightful owners. To the DA and FF Plus, this is the time for you to be on the right side of history. To all other political parties, let consciousness speak to you. Remember the words of Solomon Kalusha Mahlangu when he said, "Tell my people that I love them and that they must continue to fight. My blood will nourish the tree that will bear the fruit of freedom. Aluta continua." The land was stolen, the land must be returned. Honorable Chairperson, let me take this moment to respond to two issues. One, DA and FF Plus. Clearly there's confusion in terms of separation of powers. Payment of land will be executed by the executive, not judiciary. No court will decide in terms of how much payment must be given to anybody on a process of land. Chairperson, ATM and FF Plus, ATM and EFF are sitting in the same bed. When we met with them, they agreed on everything. Therefore, we are not shocked with the views of the ATM on this podium. But unfortunately for UDM, General, you of all people, when we wanted to meet with you, you refused. You never made any submissions on the amendment. However, you can't today come here and grandstand and speak about us selling out. Why didn't you want to meet with us if you are selling out? Honorable Chairperson, IFP, Honorable...
Order, honorable members, order.
To the IFP, it's quite unfortunate, given the discussions and everything that has taken place, that you come here and grandstand and speak about corruption in the ANC. Unfortunately, in your case, yours is Ngonyama Trust, nothing else. If we don't speak about Ngonyama Trust, you will not agree with us. And Honorable Milda, maybe we must tell people of South Africa that you wanted...
Honorable Chairperson.
Yes. Take your seat, honorable member. Why are you rising, honorable member?
Take a question.
Honorable member, are you
Chairperson, I've been raising my hand forever.
Are you prepared to take a question, honorable member Mashlatsi?
No, Chairperson.
The honorable member will take a question.
Can we check the sobriety of honorable?
Please proceed, honorable member. Proceed.
Honorable Chairperson. Honorable Chairperson, on a point of order.
Honorable Schlenger, what is your point of order now?
I would like the Honorable Minister of Justice and Correctional Services to withdraw the remark that he just made. It's out of order and quite frankly very childish.
I didn't hear the remark, honorable member.
I'd like to study Hunter, but he knows exactly what he has said, and if he has any honor, he will withdraw it.
Honorable member, I will look into the matter and I will deal with it if there was any transgression of the rule. Continue, Honorable Mashlatsi.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. When we met with FF Plus, when we were discussing the cut-off date of 1913, what they wanted, they asked us whether are we willing to give them the blueprint. Imagine in the democratic dispensation, an organization still believe that apartheid regime and apartheid must still persist in these times. Chairperson, with my 35 minutes that is left.
No, honorable member, I must disappoint you. Your time has expired. The official at the table did not restart the timer. So your time, unfortunately, has expired.
We support this report.
Chairperson, I've had my hand up for a long time. Chairperson is Minister Zulu here. No.
Order, honorable members, order. Minister Zulu, you said you had your hand up. I can't see your hand from where I'm sitting. I was not advised.
Chairperson, I've had my hand up long before, Chairperson.
Honorable Minister, it was not
Chairperson.
My attention that you had your hand up.
No, but that's exactly where the problem lies, Chairperson, with the people who are working in front there. I am behaving in my best way. I was told I must raise my hand. My hand is up. This is the second time my hand is not seen.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. Honorable members, that concludes the debate.
This is not fair.
Are there any objections to the bill being read a second time?
House Chair.
House Chair.
There are objections.
And
Yes,
the
Honourable
DA would
Member.
like to call for a division.
Honourable Members, this bill falls within the ambit of Section 74, subsection 2 of the Constitution. A supporting vote of 2/3 of the members of the Assembly is therefore needed. This amounts to 267 votes in support of the bill. Although a division has been called, we would have put the matter to the House anyway. That's a requirement of the Constitution. The bells will be rung for 5 minutes to alert members to be ready to exercise their vote. The bells will be rung.
All right, the bells there in the National Assembly are being run at the moment to indicate that the vote is about to take place, and that's on the issue of the amendment of Section 25 of the Constitution, which is about expropriation without compensation. You heard there from the Speaker saying that a 2/3 majority is required for that to happen. We'll certainly be keeping you up to date with this. For now, though, let's take a short break. Do stay with us here on SABC News.